Now, you might know that people here in Nigeria have taken to sleeping outside banks because they want to be among the first in line to get the newly designed Naira banknotes or possibly exchange their old ones for them. The trouble is the banks don't seem to have enough of the new ones, and in any case, it's not entirely clear when the old notes will cease to be legal tender. As you know, the Supreme Court has become involved and will weigh in on whether the deadline for exchanging old for new should be extended for a second time. It's put off that decision till the 22nd of February, just 3 days before the presidential election. Meanwhile, the cash crunch crisis has come with press conferences and protests for and against the central bank's move to scrap the old notes, and it's all been exacerbated by the shortage of the new notes and the fact that many businesses are rejecting the old ones amid a grinding fuel shortage, deepening inflation and rising food prices. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the development economist Odilim Basel Enwegbara and by the lawyer and Arise legal analyst Izegbu. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. Let me start with you, Mr. Enwegbara. Does it look like the situation is escalating? I mean, because we've heard of a lot of protests in several cities across Nigeria.
You see, after God, the next thing is money. Money can make you today become too powerful than any president in the world. So when this was started, I cautioned, because I was on one of the televisions, and I cautioned, look, have we analyzed the consequences? Because an economy is run on cash movement, and you disrupt that, what else do you expect? Chaos. You see, it is a good policy. In fact, this is a policy we ought to have started if Buhari was interested, as soon as he became president, and took 3 to 4 years, or 3 years, or 2 years, to ensure that it is perfect.
Well, that would defeat part of the,
yes.
the purpose,
but
wouldn't
you
it?
see,
I mean,
the fire brigade...
If you gave it 4 years... I mean,
No, it's not true, because, you know, America is working on its own...
No, we're not talking about America,
yes,
we're talking about Nigeria.
Okay,
there are peculiar circumstances in this country with regard to politicians, corruption, vote buying. That's part of the reason why it is given such a small window. You see what I mean? That's the whole idea. I agree with you that part of that, the problem has been with the implementation of it. But the fact remains that if you're trying to checkmate what politicians are doing, you can't give them 4 years, can you?
No, Mr. Niagolo, let's agree on one thing. That everybody has his own weaknesses and strengths. If you plan ahead, you won't have the chaos. But if you targeted at a particular point in time, you have the problem. Had it been that we planned without looking at a particular group of politicians, by the way, e-voting could have taken place, which I met the guy.
Well, that's a different case. It's not taking place. So let's just let's focus on this.
So what I'm trying to let you know,
the main point.
What I'm trying to let you know is that had it been it was earlier planned and executed, 60 days, 90 days is the cause of this. Let's, in future, ensure we plan ahead. Let's ignore those who will cause that problem. But we beat them so that we cannot, because we want to fight them, we cause chaos. So many lives have, in fact, and I have not seen the new currency for 2 weeks now. I have not seen it. What I mean, I have not touched it and had it. Because you go to the bank, you see chaos.
Sure
you run
where
away,
you hang out, mate.
No, excuse me. I wanted to go and buy it. It's discovered you don't have them. So I have to go to supermarkets where I'll give my card, because I went to a place I wanted to buy something, and I gave them my card. They said that for me to get 10,000, I have to give them 3,000. I said, no, I won't give you. So I left. I have to go to supermarket. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. I haven't seen the card. So in essence, let's be realistic here. Let's learn from these mistakes. And I want the Supreme Court intervention. It was very good. Because if not, it will cause
well, we're interested in tapping your brain from the point of view of you being a development economist.
So now you see the financial, you see the consequences in terms of inflation. And the Nigeria might go towards recession. You see the Indian effect. India did this in 2016. and India is still going through that.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to you in a minute. Let me turn to the lawyer and Arise legal analyst here, Chinwe Izegbu. Thank you very much indeed for your patience, Charles, and for coming in. And all this, of course, is coming against the backdrop of the Supreme Court adjourning a case in which up to, I understand, 10 states now are challenging the implementation of the deadline. Of the deadline to have these notes scrapped. What's your sense of where things stand now, and from a legal perspective?
Yes. Well, from a legal perspective, Charles, it's very, very disheartening for many Nigerians, not just for the legal system. We have just a very week to go for the general elections. And that makes it even more terrifying, without mincing words, without being diplomatic about it. It's something that we have to reconsider as a nation. And with all due respect to the apex court, the Supreme Court, the decision today, which must be complied with, has actually left many people in disarray. Most people don't know whether or not the legal tender is the old notes or the new ones. So there is a bit of a confusion. Even when you go past any banks, wherever they are, you find crowds of people outside. And there are very many vendors refusing to take the old legal notes. Now, when the Supreme Court made its decision today, it was actually an interim injunction order.
Yes, it was.
Restraining.
Well, at the outset, it was an interim injunction.
Exactly. Right. And what it is that what the Supreme Court has done is to repeat itself as to what happened on the 8th, which was a week ago, on the 8th of this month. What it has done, in effect, is restraining all executive organizations, including the CBN, even though they're not joined as a party to the proceedings. What they have done is to restrain them from challenging the validity of the old notes. In other words, that the old notes should still be legal tender. But having said that, what the Supreme Court wants us to have effect, or what the nation should take into consideration, is the Latin term which says status quo ante ebullitum.
Right, yes.
Which means that the situation should remain as it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
In other words, there should be no change as to the old notes. The old notes should still be legal tender. And that is what the Supreme Court had actually, I think, with all due respect.
But let me ask you this,
yes,
though. I mean, you have a better understanding
yes,
about legal issues
yes,
than a lot of ordinary people
yes,
do. What is your take on the fact that the Supreme Court has adjourned this till 3 days before the election? I mean, taking into account your understanding of legal circumstances,
yes,
and parameters and all the rest of it,
yes,
do you think that is, I mean, without sort of having given some sort of value judgment on,
yes,
on the Supreme Court,
yes,
which obviously you have to, we have to be careful about giving.
yes.
Do you see that as, from a legal point of view, an appropriate time frame?
Well, timing is everything, isn't it? But unfortunately, the Supreme Court has to hear matters that have been brought before it. And under Order 8, Rule 16 of the Supreme Court rules, they have the jurisdiction. The Supreme Court, as the apex court, has the jurisdiction to hear matters of this nature, where the federal government and the state government have brought cases before it. And the only difficulty we have here is that the Supreme Court should give us an intention, or give us what it meant as to the decision that was before it today. Even though we as lawyers know that it meant that the status quo should be maintained. But for the common man everywhere else, those who are very worried about the old legal notes or the new legal notes, we look at that Order 8, Rule 16 of the Supreme Court rules which state that where there is any difficulty in interpreting the decision of the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court may well reconvene, even tomorrow, to consider the intention or the meaning of that decision that was made today.
But of course, on the other hand, and I'll come to you in a minute, Mr. Enwegbara, on the other hand, the Supreme Court doesn't sit there saying, oh, well, there's elections coming up. It has to give itself enough time to examine a case. So it could easily come on Wednesday and say, we're going to move it for another week or two.
Yes, that's right. The Supreme Court has inherent jurisdiction to do as it deems fit in such circumstances, particularly in the face of compelling evidence. Compelling evidence here, we have the country without missing words, in chaos. People are troubled. People are very worried as to how they can make ends meet. People are worried as to how they can go to the market and buy commodities without people refusing to accept the old notes or saying they want the new notes, even though the Supreme Court has said that the status quo should be maintained.
Absolutely.
So that's where we think that to bring about a solution to this matter, the Supreme Court can reconvene, even tomorrow morning, by its own inherent jurisdiction, and give a meaning as to what the decision was.
That's a very interesting point. And yes. Mr. Enwegbara, wearing your development economist hat, I mean, we know that the Supreme Court, we don't have any evidence that they're going to reconvene tomorrow or the day after. We know they're going to reconvene in a week. Meanwhile, in the context of all this that is happening, the inflation rate has increased to 21.82%, along with increasing food prices. You've got this Naira scarcity, then you've got fuel scarcity. How do you read all that in the context of this Supreme Court issue that we're talking about and the privations that it's imposed on Nigerian people?
What that means is that the economy has been on standstill. Because if you go to the banks are not talking about lending or deposits, but everybody is in chaos. That's what I'm trying to say, that the fact remains that we ought to have planned this into the economy. Because elections must come and go. But you see, when you create an economic system that is full of uncertainties, people will always be very careful whether they're going to invest in that country or not. So the issue I've been pointing out is that CBN ought to have sat down with the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Budget, Ministry of Finance, and all those ministries that are part of the economic management team, and they look at how, if we do this, what will be the consequences on the economy. But you see, anyway, I don't want to go into the legal implications because I'm not a lawyer, but what I'm trying to say in essence is that, look at now, investors are actually staying away. Nigerian investors, if you're an investor, you'll be thinking twice, because this has hit so many investors. It has hit so many investors. Imagine now you can't fly. Imagine if you fly, you can't take a taxi. All these things, they're microeconomies, but when you add them up, they now hit the economy on the face.
But do you agree with those who say that the scarcity of the new notes is connected to people such as banks and politicians who have access to the new notes and are hoarding them? I mean, you're a guy who's an economist. You must have chums who are bank managers and things.
Exactly. But you see, hoarding is, every hoarding hurts an economy, because hoarding actually creates artificial disequilibrium to the economy. So how do you say that they are hoarding? Because you created an avenue for hoarding. Because in an economy, there must be demand and supply. When the demand is high, supply will try to meet demand. When the supply is high, demand will try to meet supply. But when you create disequilibrium, which is caused artificially, then you create chances for hoarding. So it becomes difficult for me to assess what they are doing, because as you rightly said, I'm not a magician, so I don't know what goes behind. But you have created that avenue of ensuring that demand and supply are not created by forces of market forces. So that is what we are seeing. So in essence, that's why I said it's a good idea, but we would have planned ahead. Don't test running without the public knowing what will happen, so that we see how it will play out. Government can be planning something for 2 years now, nobody will know, except those involved. So they will say, what if this happens? What will be our reaction? What if this happens? When you factor in all those things, when you launch, you discover that you will no longer be taken by surprise. Because Central Bank of Nigeria was taken by surprise. They didn't know the social disequilibrium it was going to cause. And the morality side of it, because when you see some of these Supreme Court judges, they are looking at the moral side of it, the social side of it. They're no longer looking at judicial side of it.
That's a good point.
Exactly, they're having human feelings. That was why the head of the Supreme Court said, a hungry man is an angry man. And it's true. Because when you lose your source of income, I've told you, money is so powerful that after God, there's nothing more powerful than money. Even to possess power, you need money. You know that. So we would have appreciated the value of money, appreciated the velocity of money, appreciated we are running an informal economy. Nigeria is about 75% an informal economy. So informal economies are dependent on cash exchanges. They are not dependent on transfers, online payments, which I get to that. But let's not rush, because this thing that happened to Nigerians, let it not happen again, for God's sake. Because we are running a modern economy, we are not running a banana economy.
Yeah, well, that's you made some good points there. Let me come to you, Chinwe Izegbu. Going beyond your sort of the fairly sort of focused legal analyst perspective to you being a general analyst, which I'm sure you are as well. There is a political dimension which we touched on earlier, isn't there, in addition to the legal and the economic, because Nigerians will be voting, as you said, in 10 days or so. Many governors wanted the deadline shifted. Some say politicians want to be able to buy votes. Well, the governors dispute this. What's your perspective on that?
Well, from the political point of view, Charles, I think that Nigerians have their own opinion. They all have their respective views as to why there is this controversial policy. And I'm not going to make make a view as known one way or the other. However, because we have the legislative, executive, executive, legislative, and judiciary,
right,
the three separate powers under the Nigerian Constitution, they are actually in such that one should be a check on the other. So the judiciary has obviously shown us today how the balance of powers can play out. In other words, that the CBN, being under the executive arm of government, should comply with the judiciary. At the same time, one cannot supersede the other. So that's where we may have the president of the Federation may well want to come in, as my learned friend said earlier, my senior colleague said earlier, may well make an executive decision tomorrow as to whether or not the old notes stand as legal tender or not, or whether the new ones. In other words, the executive arm of government has the power to determine.
Well, absolutely. Well, in that regard, I mean, there was a report that emerged subsequent to what happened today, that the president had a meeting with governors, and I emphasize the fact that it's reported. He had a meeting with governors, and apparently the agreement was that they would go to court, withdraw this, and he would extend the deadline. They didn't withdraw it, so obviously he didn't extend it. But is that something you would have welcomed?
That would have been good. But you see, Charles, these 40 days or 60 days extra would have been factored in. Wouldn't have given
but it wasn't. So let's deal with what is happening now.
It's good. If Mr. President actually, what would have happened would have been Mr. President would have first of all made his own move. Because as you can see, the governors didn't trust him. So that's why they did not make their own move first. Because what Mr. President would have done, as he said, would have been on Tuesday, make a pronouncement on Tuesday night that I am extending this deadline of the legal tender status of the old Naira to April 1st or this and that. I expect that I had a meeting with the governors. We see what they will say. They will not go there and argue because they are Nigerians. These guys are also affected, because he who wears the shoes knows where it pinches. Remember, there are the security officers of their state, the chief executive of the economists and things like. And when they discover that production is not happening, people are stranded on the streets and they cannot look the other way.
But is it the motivation, do you think? Because the central bank and a lot of people, civil society and so on, seem to think that the motivation is personal. It's to try and influence the election.
Fantastic question. But you see, unfortunately, our governor will become a politician too. So what he is doing has political undertone. He's a politician. If he was independent, if he never participated in any form or assumed to have interest, then all of us will support him. But because he has joined politics, one way or another, everybody is seeing it that either he's supporting APC with his policies or is against APC with policies. So he could no longer morally come to justify that his policy lacks political influence.
Right, that's very interesting. What are your thoughts on that? And those are the final thoughts before we have to go, I'm afraid.
Well, if we have to say final thoughts on this is that we only hope and pray that things will be resolved by as early as tomorrow, as opposed to waiting another 1 week, which is 22nd of February. That will be taking matters too far in the future, because 1 week is a long time in politics, as you know, Charles.
Absolutely. And for you, a final word then? I mean, if it doesn't change tomorrow, obviously we're just going to have to limp along, won't we?
Yes, but we learn from that. I want this thing to be resolved in a way that Nigerians have to remember the election of 2023, even 20 years from now, what transpired and what Nigerians went through and the hell they went through. Because I also am a witness, and you shall say a witness. Let's not gamble with the futures and the lives of fellow Nigerians for any reason. Politicians must mind politics and allow Nigerians to go about their normal businesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. The development economist, Odilim Basel Enwegbara, and the lawyer and Arise legal analyst, Izegbu. Thank you to both of you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.